Okay, today is Rosh Hashanah, and it's a day that rabbis or I think it's just the Kabbalists, who say that this is the time that commemorates the creation of Ha'ava and Ha'adam, okay? Or incorrectly in English, it would be Adam and Eve. This day is supposed to commemorate their creation. And there's a few aspects of the story that typically tend to go unnoticed when looking at it from an English perspective. Okay. Now, when looking at it from a Kabbalist perspective, it says the fall from grace was the decision to incarnate into a physical body and to take on flesh, because when you take on flesh, then surely you will eventually die. This is what some rabbis teach about the Genesis or Bereshit story. Another thing to note that's kind of interesting is in the Apocalypse of Moses, which is usually not included in the European Bible. It says that Ha'ava and Ha'adam are held within a specific realm of heaven or a specific realm of existence until the final judgment. They're not just automatically sent straight to hell and tormented. No. They have a specific realm of existence where they live, and then after that they get evaluated. And the Apocalypse of Moses probably has some truth in it, because one of the events that occurred in the Apocalypse of Moses, when Adam and his sons abandoned their covenant with the true Creator, all of the leaves fall dead from the trees in that exact moment that they do it, because in that story it's made clear that Eve is pretty much worshiping God alone, and that Adam really had nothing to do with it and mostly was a non-participant. And in the story, when Satan comes along, he's basically jumping over a fence to rape her, and Adam, he's nowhere to be seen. And then when what Satan does is, after he gets done raping Eve, then he goes to find Adam and all of Adam's sons. And he says to Adam, and he basically kind of recruits the men and gets the men on board with what their agenda's going to be. And when Adam dies, there's like this huge celebration. But when Eve dies, they just drop her in a hole. 4 angels, they say goodbye, and that's the end of it. So it's kind of interesting to note that in that version of the story, they have all this high praise and high honor with both God and Satan, focusing most of the praise and development onto Adam and mostly just ignoring Eve. And even though Eve was worshiping alone, she was fully unattended with Adam nowhere to be seen, and she was getting raped on the ground, because it says Satan, he bent his branch on the ground. That's not hard to understand. So that is a different perspective there in the Apocalypse of Moses. And I don't even know why they call it that, though. I have no idea why they call it the Apocalypse of Moses, because it's just the story of Genesis. Like, Moses appears nowhere in that story. Maybe they're trying to claim that Moses wrote it. Like, I don't know what the deal is with that. But I do know that incident with the leaves falling dead from the trees, outside of the proper season, There's an event similar to that happened in modern times, where in Kerala, India, the people said there was a loud clap like thunder, and then all the leaves fell dead from the trees, and then there was 2 months of nonstop blood red rain in this 2001 event that ended within 48 hours of Hebrew Yom Kippur in Kerala, India. And the location is significant because the Apocalypse of Moses says that when Satan is banished from Gan Eden, where the river Euphrates and Tigris River and all 2 other rivers come together, it says when he's banished from that location, he travels away to India. And it's interesting to note that the incident described in the Apocalypse of Moses, it happened in India in real life in 2001, and it was documented by NASA, Harvard, and the National Geographic Explorer. But when they talk about the 2 months of blood red rain that occurred in 2001, they don't tell you that it ended within 48 hours of Hebrew Yom Kippur. They don't tell you that Kerala is an ancient Jewish community that traded with King Solomon. They don't tell you that the same event is mentioned in the Apocalypse of Moses that talks about what happened with Adam and Eve. You don't get that part of the equation. When looking at, the reports from National Geographic Explorer and Harvard and NASA, when they reported on the event, they left those parts out, which is a pretty common recurring theme in the media in general. So anyway, with that said, So at least one of the events described in a story about Adam and Eve, it really did occur in real life in 2001, and it was very much an anomaly. If it was a comet or an algae, like they said, it wouldn't have been coming down thick nonstop for 2 months and then end within 48 hours of a holiday. If it was just that, it wouldn't have been like consistently nonstop for 2 months. I mean, come on, common sense. Where was it when? But anyway, another thing I want to point out about the story of Genesis is that name numerology is kind of hinted at in the book of Genesis, where God tells them to name everything, right? And then we fast forward to the book of Revelation. It says the number of the name of the beast is 666, right? Okay. So here we see that the name of the beast has a number 666. And then we look back at the book of Genesis, and Adam and Eve, they have a call to learn how to name everything. And in name numerology, when you name things, it's like you're speaking life or speaking death and problems into another creature, another living thing, or even a geographic location just by what you name it. And if that name is numerically balanced with the date of birth or the date of creation, then things tend to kind of work out better. If it's not, the name is not balanced with the date of birth or the date of creation, then you got serious problems. And from taking out the time to learn about name numerology, and the different systems for choosing numerically balanced names, I can actually look at, given the information I've gathered, I can look at the names of different nations and different ethnicities and see how that those specific influences played out in the destinies of specific nations, places, and even I can see where even in the deities of specific religions, I can see where how the nakshatras and the destinies produced by certain number patterns really played out on that front for certain deities and locations. And I just kind of feel like humanity is at a great disservice by knowing next to nothing about how to balance a name with the date of birth or date of creation and the roles that name nakshatras play in it, because different cultures seem to have a different piece of the puzzle in regard to name numerology. But it's kind of, it takes quite a bit of work to get started with learning about it, and certain parts of it, certain parts of it, it seems kind of difficult to find or maybe impossible to find in a book. I don't know. I did find one class, but I don't know if they break it down on the deeper level that most other people really just don't have. I don't know if they get that deep into it in the class or if it's just more surface level stuff, because for one company, it's like a trade secret, as they call it. And then from and this is a white owned company that does name balancing numerically. And on the Asian Vedic side, I noticed that a certain source of information that I happen to stumble upon, I don't uh, I don't think the deeper parts of that information is available in books or classes. Not any that I know of publicly that I've seen so far. So, as far as answering the call to learn about naming people, plants, animals, and places, I can look back at places I've traveled to in the past. I can look back at the history of certain nations and certain deities. I can look back at certain people I've had interactions with in my past and see how the deeper version of name numerology that has the more detailed descriptions of how a destiny plays out, not the surface stuff, but the deeper stuff, it's really very powerful and revealing. It really is. But I don't know what sources a person can go to learn the deeper parts of it. And what I noticed is, like in the white system, they seem to, when they numerically balance a name, they seem to like kind of look at not just the financial aspect of it, but the spiritual and personal and emotional aspect. But what they miss is the negative influence of nakshatras, and I can kind of see where the whole nakshatra thing, it does matter, and I can see how it tends to play out in the lives of some individuals I know personally. And in the Asian Vedic system of balancing a name, just from my limited exposure to it, it just seems like it focuses more on the money and the financial aspect and not so much on the emotional interrelational part at all. So, uh, and it tends to do a better job of catching the drawbacks generated by nakshatras. So it's like each system, I think they're probably not sharing information with each other, but each one seems to have a different piece of the puzzle. And I don't know of any Black or Indigenous American system for naming that goes deeper into describing a destiny that manifested by a specific set of codes in a name. I don't know of any African or Native American system that does that. It might exist, maybe. And if it does, then it's not available to the public. So you have these 4 races. 2 of them may or may not have their own unique approach to name numerology. And the one thing that I'm looking at is, okay, why is it that the deeper aspects of a destiny manifested by a name and a date of creation or a date of birth, why is it that you can go to a white company and get that? You can go to an Asian company and get that or learn it. But when it comes to the Hebrew, the black or the Native American side, I don't know of anything on that level. Something's amiss. Like, it's not there. It was at one time, but it's not openly available now. So what I'm wondering is why. Is it not openly available because of some kind of power struggle? Or is it not openly available because most people would only abuse it? Or is it kind of a little bit of both? And so I know there are a lot of people, a lot of white evangelical Christians, they know that name numerology is in the book of Revelation. They, with the number of the name of the beast, 666. They know name numerology is hinted at and alluded to in the book of Genesis, with Adam and Eve being told to learn the science of naming things, or learn how to name things. It's just not spelled out in detail. It's there. And then you have the apostles. They use divination to select a replacement for Judas. And then you have you have all different kinds of things, all different kinds of practices in the Old and New Testament. But then when you get to the white evangelical church, they're like, oh, no, nobody's supposed to ever learn anything. Anything outside of our European version is witchcraft and gives us a moral and legal right to say that you don't know God and you're serving the devil and you're a danger to the community. And that is just the most disgusting level of error. I'm like, why are we not past that as a society? Why? We should be. I'm not saying that, all people who are not Christian or Jewish are evil. I'm not saying we all need to be in one world religion, but I am saying there are specific practices that were acceptable. And just because a bunch of men recopied everything and said, oh, well, even though it's there and spelled out in writing, you still can't do it because it's satanic. Yeah, the apostles did it, but it's from the devil. Or it's like there's always some excuse. And I'm like, and I just look at it and I'm like, are some people promoting an effort to try to figure out what's really wrong in regard to are they really trying to figure out what's wrong and trying to get to the heart of things? Or are they just trying to reassert their own individual culture? Because, and I know there's plenty of pagans where there's a lot of pagans who are not trying to get to the heart of what's really wrong and only trying to reassert their culture and vie for power or compete for power. Just like Christians, I'm aware of that. But at the same time, I'm like, when do we get past that and try to really get to the heart of what's wrong instead of just struggling for power? Because that seems like that's the only thing most people are really hell-bent on, is just that whole thing of struggling for power.